Hey everybody, it's Mike from the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios and brought to you by official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Molson's The Missing, available on Amazon and paperback and ebook. We're here with a terrific gentleman who's an author, activist who began a movement out of desire to better world for future generations and co-hosts a weekly podcast expanding a moneyless society. We can put that in the bank and talk about that. And of course, he's been doing this for quite some time, and we'll get the story on about how this is coming about, especially with today's economy these days. And he has a new book out that offers hope and steps everyone can take to basically just right the ship, and how capitalism thwarts Earth's capacity to maintain life and undermines the desire for peace and prosperity. So he's got the steps, and he does it with a Moneyless Society. That's the name of his book, Moneyless Society, the next economic education, and also for evolution, and also hosts a podcast called the Moso Podcast. It's a weekly podcast. Live, ladies and gentlemen, from Plus Studios in beautiful downtown San Diego, the author, activist who began a movement out of desire to better a world for future generations with a Moneyless Society. Also the book, Moneyless Society, the next economic evolution. Ladies and gentlemen, the multi-talented Matt Holten. Matt, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. My pleasure.
Well, it's great to have you on board, Matt. You're an author and activist who began the movement out of desire to better the world for future generations. You also co-host a weekly podcast expanding the Moneyless Society called the Moso Podcast. You're also the author of the book, Moneyless Society, the next economic evolution, which offers hope and steps everyone can take to collectively right the ship, and how capitalism can thwart the Earth's capacity as well, too. And we'll talk about the whole concept of the Moneyless Society based on what's going on with the world in terms of the economy these days. And before getting all that, Matt, tell us how you first got started.
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess my story will go back to my childhood. I kind of had a tumultuous childhood. My mother ended up committing suicide. She basically, the medical system failed her to a large degree. She got in a car accident and she ended up getting addicted to painkillers. She had a disc in her neck fused, and she was having a heck of a time just moving her neck and being mobile and things like that. But, she ended up getting on painkillers and essentially went psychotic after a couple of years on painkillers, and started thinking that the government was taping her calls, and that people were after us and trying to kill us and things like this. And eventually she committed suicide, jumped off a bridge in Northwest Houston. At that time, I ran away from home. I dropped out of school. It was devastating for me. I was a teenager, 15 years old at the time. I ended up not finishing school, not really having much of a college career. I became addicted to drugs and alcohol. I bounced from state to state. I've had over 100 different jobs in my life. I've worked, waited tables at 7 different restaurants, 8 different pizza places. I've done like 20 different telemarketing jobs, probably. I've dealt poker. I've taught piano lessons. I've sold insurance and real estate, among many other things. And the system kind of failed me to also just essentially give me a good footing in society, since I wasn't ever really to get a decent college education, and I had mental health issues essentially of my own from that point on. So I really just kind of advocated more for a society, or I longed really for a society that would help people and actually give people the things that they need in daily life, without having to trade their time and labor for essentially just everyday essentials like food, water, clothing, shelter, things like that. And I also just, found the way the world works just to be really cold. How medical institutions and a lot of other, businesses and institutions end up putting profits before people. And, a lot of people just don't get the help and the care that they need in order to survive on a daily basis. And so essentially, the Moneyless Society is a way to correct all that in the long term. What we hope to do is obsolete, the monetary system, the money and the banking system, and make what people need abundant, essentially. The things that people need on a daily basis to survive, we want to provide them in abundance and for free. So people no longer need to work 40-hour work weeks or perform all this endless activity, just to survive essentially on a daily basis. And we know that we have the technology to do that now. Probably wasn't capable of doing that 50 or 100 years ago, but with all the technology, automation, robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of these sorts of things. We have the technology to do that now, and that's honestly the direction that things are heading. A lot of it is automating a lot of the major functions of society, and that's why we have such an astounding number of one of the reasons why we have an astounding number of lost jobs these days as well, because a lot of it's just simply being automated away. And so it kind of leaves us with a conundrum what to do about all this, because inequality is really spiking. Our capitalist system essentially really incentivizes exploitation of other people and of resources as well. And those are kind of the two main problems: one, inequality and all the effects of inequality, as well as just resource overshoot. We're overusing our resources, and our current economic system is incentivizing us to do that. At breakneck speed, and those are essentially the two biggest problems. And so by eliminating the profit incentive, we can address a lot of these problems. We no longer would have to go 40 hours a week just performing all this endless activity to survive, and we are no longer incentivized to exploit other people or resources with the systems and structures that we talk about in my book. And so for me, it was kind of a long-term journey figuring these things out. I created a website. I started cataloging these things. And, 10 years down the road, now there's a book with, all these ideas and everything in there. But I'm certainly not the first person to do or think of all these things. There are many others before me who I've, learned and gathered all this information from. So I just, compiled it in one place and tried to make it as easily digestible as possible.
Now, you mentioned about working as a telemarketer for 20 different places. And of course, that's going automated, AI, and just about everything else. Did you have that thought while you're working telemarketing that it was going to be done by robots, or were you just more about concerned about a paycheck, or the thing about robots, AI, and all that? When you work telemarketing yourself, did that ever cross your mind? Yes or no?
Not to a large degree, no. I mean, I had a feeling, that probably would be one of the jobs that would be automated away in the future, but it wasn't really something that I was very concerned with, namely because I always hated telemarketing. And it wasn't really to me a long-term career option. It wasn't something that I saw myself doing, 20 years down the road, calling people and trying to switch their phone service and, to long distance
car
service.
warranties.
Right? Exactly,
Which I forgot to do on purpose. So
yeah. And it's funny, like technology, we don't even have local and like long distance service anymore. It's just phone service. You just have a cell phone these days. And so, technology has kind of even obsoleted some of the positions or some of the services that I was even selling 20 years ago. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there are so many jobs like that could be automated right now. Like coffee shops could be almost completely automated. Grocery stores could be pretty much wholly automated for the most part. Even food production and processing. Robots. They're teaching robots how to do agriculture and farming and things like that, and they're getting better at it every day. And the more we're able to automate processes like that, the more human labor we can eliminate, and we can do that consciously too, to where people don't have to starve. And they don't have to go without necessities just because, wait a second, I can't, find a job. I can't, find a place that's going to give me a paycheck for working 40 hours a week for performing some activity, regardless of whether it actually contributes anything to the human race or not. And it's kind of a silly thing to do, just to make that a barrier, to somebody to survive, to get the things that they need. It's like, why can't we work together in communities to create automated gardens? To create automated systems for food production, for water harvesting, for, community building, even. Like they have 3D printers that build homes now. It takes two people to set up the thing and it can build a home in like 24 hours, give or take. And we can do that. We have the technology to do that now. So.
Now, what are some of the jobs out there that don't require AI, or that's not going to go by the wayside of AI? What are some of the jobs out there and professions that are not going to go by the way of AI or robots?
Sure. I mean, and that's a great question too. I would say a lot of the things that especially require a human touch, like we'll probably still have, doctors long into the future, as well as other medical professionals. As I say, things like, especially like massage therapists and things like that. If you have a problem that needs, working out in a muscle tissue or something like that, and that would be possibly a difficult thing for a robot to do, especially if you're kind of seeking, a human's touch, essentially, because a robot's not going to, have a human's touch, and you're not going to get oxytocin from touching, a robot. It doesn't really work the same way. So I think anything where you really crave human connection, especially educators as well, it'll be difficult probably to have a really robust, open-minded education program without some sort of human intervention or human, uh, there's kind of like middleman there to kind of make sure students actually get it, to make sure there's no gaps that the student didn't get, it wasn't filled in by some, protocol or program or something like that. But we don't really view it so much as like jobs, essentially. Like, we're not going to say, okay, you have to clock in at this job and work for 40 hours a week. We would view it more as just kind of like systems and structures where people have roles in, where essentially they make sure everybody is taken care of in the ways that they need to be taken care of,
Mm.
and so people might have more fluid roles, within these types of community structures and things like that,
Mm.
where if you need help in one area, maybe you help in that area a little bit more, and you kind of slide over from a different area if it's not needed so much, or I mean, essentially, we don't really have all the answers to this either. It could be different, in one area than in another area. And one of the things we really advocate is autonomy and experimentation, to figure these things out as well. We don't
Mhm.
we don't exactly have the ideal governance structure for a moneyless society, but we can say, how would you want it to work?
Mhm.
In your neighborhood or your community or your region or things like that, what would work best for you or your community and people in that area? And you
Mhm.
have to kind of consider different things too, like, what the food that you're going to grow, say in Hawaii, probably isn't going to be the same food that you're growing in Alaska, or in Portugal or Australia and things like that. There might be cultural factors and geographical factors, and a lot of other things to consider from area to area, as far as just exactly what will work, what isn't going to work, and for various reasons. And so yeah, so that's something I always emphasize is we don't have it all figured out. We haven't really detailed this and made big structural diagrams of exactly how all the pieces would fit together and work. But we have general ideas and principles, that we can follow, and eventually kind of evolve these systems into being, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
He also talked about the labors as well too, providing for this, providing for that, especially those that require the
Hmm.
human touch. And I'm sure they would do poorly with animals. Of course, you don't know how Fluffy, Fido, or Spot's going to respond to a robot as well. You'd be going, nowadays be going from laborers over to like caregivers or caretakers. That's what it seems like.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that could be definitely one of the roles that people fulfill in these types of societies. And yeah, I mean, there's lots of questions to be answered. One of the main questions that I get to is what would incentivize people to work, and I like to emphasize that there probably wouldn't be as much work to do in this type of society, because a lot of your needs will be met essentially by automation, and whatever needs aren't met by automation, there's going to be a lot more free time that people have, that they can contribute and volunteer to do these things, essentially, where needs aren't being met. There will be much more capability for people to step up and do that, especially if these systems are working well. Then people will be incentivized to step up and contribute and keep them working, because if the community is feeding everybody and everybody's getting the health care and the water and food, and the shelter that they need from these communities and from these structures, then people aren't going to want to let them fall apart. They're going to want to uh, step up and make sure that these things function well for the benefit of themselves and everybody. And that's kind of one of the main things that keeps it all going, is people just, the positive reinforcement that comes from having uh just a community that works well and where people are taken care of, you
Mm.
know
So in other words, it wouldn't be like a 40-hour work week, it'd be like maybe a 30-hour, 20-hour, 25, or maybe even down to like, 15 or 10.
It's possible, yeah, and it could just be depending on, the role, how many people are available in said community, the demands of exactly what that role is, how many hours it would require. There's a lot of variables to consider there, but yeah, I mean, we would shoot for a vastly reduced work week. Instead of 40 hours being standard, we would probably shoot for at least no more than half of that, 20 to 25. I feel like 5 hours, after 4 or 5 hours a day, we'd probably go for like a 4-day work week max, also with a 3-day weekend. But say you work 5 hours a day, 4 days a week, that's 20 hours a week. I think that's a pretty reasonable workload for a lot of people, especially when you factor in like health and wellness and self-care and just community relationships, time for socializing, and a lot of other things that just make people well and happy,
Mhm.
essentially. And that's the goal of this, a lot of
Now, in terms of the work week as well, too, would the
hmm
wages be the same? Would the wages still differ by skill set and everything like
hmm
that? And would also take like like different wages, different people, and everything like that? Would it be like the same wage for everybody, or would still be the wages differ based on skill set and then say
so
seniority?
so there's a distinction I want to make here. So we talk in my book, I talk about transitioning to a moneyless society, and in the transitional period there would still be wages, and but the ultimate goal is to obsolete money altogether, which would also mean obsoleting wages and obsoleting being paid by the hour. And really what we seek to do is just to make any sort of commercial trade or commercial transactions really obsolete and not necessary. We would prefer things to be done by just creating abundance, various mutual aid agreements. We're like, hey, if you need this, we got you,
Mhm.
and if we need something in the future and you have it, hopefully you'll help us too, and these types of working agreements between individuals and communities and regions and things like that. But yeah, so eventually we would like to see a system of, I talk about this in my book too, like utilizing cooperatives. Essentially the one structure we have right now, which could vastly help us transition to that type of society, as a cooperative. And so that's where workers actually own the company, right? Or at least in a worker cooperative, which is the type of cooperative that we really advocate. So in a worker cooperative, what we want to do is eventually create an abundance of goods and services, to where there's say you have a worker co-op that produces food or lettuce, whatever, and eventually this worker cooperative produces enough food or whatever type of lettuce or whatever it is that they can provide enough to their members for free after they make money and sell and pay the bills and everything. So what we want to do is we want to network enough of these cooperatives together to where they can start providing each other with free things, right? So one cooperative is providing free food, another cooperative maybe provides free housing, another cooperative is maybe providing free water or energy or electricity or education, things like that. And you start networking these cooperatives together, and they're all producing a good abundance of what they do, so they can provide each other, they can start providing each other with a whole network that eventually we would like to call universal basic goods and services. You've
Interesting.
probably heard of universal basic income, right? For Andrew Yang and that whole platform. We're like, why do money? Why not just give people what they need, essentially? So we would call this system universal basic goods and services, and working to create that system through a network of cooperatives is our ultimate goal. And it actually, cooperatives are doing pretty well. They're I mean, it's not the most widely used business structure right now, but where it does work, it works pretty well. Say Mondragon, which is the largest cooperative in the world, they have like 80,000 employees, and they're a
Wow.
powerhouse in the solar module production. They have their own university. They are very technologically inclined and advanced as far as a business goes, and
Hmm.
so it doesn't have to be a low tech structure either. Like people think co-ops, they think like oh, the local co-op grocery store or something like that. But there's cooperatives out there that are really into the tech sector as well.
Hmm.
Mondragon is the biggest example, but there's another town in Spain called Marinaleda, which is an agricultural cooperative. They don't even have mortgages or police force, because people
Really?
just essentially, yeah, because people just essentially get what they need there. And it's a cooperative of something like 2,500 people. They've been
Hmm.
running that way for like 30 years, and it works really well.
Hmm.
And another example is Rojava in Syria, and they're a whole network of cooperatives in the northeastern region of Syria. And they do the same thing essentially. They just give people what they need. They bypass the monetary system altogether for a lot of the goods and services that they distribute, and they just give people essentially what they need through this network of cooperatives. So there are examples of this working in the world today. They're just not the most popular things, and you're sure as heck not going to hear about them on Fox News or CNN or most of the mainstream media, because it runs counter to the capitalist structure.
Now, a couple of things that popped up on mind as well too before we go on with the book as well too. People, you give people what they need. What about the people, like, say, that work the hardest, or some just have a bad hair day, don't feel like working, all that? Now, is it based on the fact that everybody gets equal regardless of how hard you work, or if you're having a bad hair day or something like that? And does that factor in it too? Like, is like still the more you work, the more you get, or does everybody get the same regardless of how hard you work, or just having like
Yeah, I
a
mean,
bad hair day?
that's a really great question, and that kind of brings us to the topic of positive reinforcement and what exactly that is and what that would look like in the type of society that we're talking about. So people equate, positive reinforcement or being rewarded for work these days with money, which a lot of the time equates to material wealth, right? So when you work really hard, let's say you're a doctor or something, you make a lot of money, you're able to have an expensive car and a big house, and you have enough money to take trips and all these things, and that's your incentive to do that. That's your positive reinforcement for doing these sorts of things. But in this type of society, that really wouldn't really be the case or the goal with that. But it doesn't mean that there's not positive reinforcement, and that doesn't mean that you don't receive anything for that work. Now, to answer your question in a material sense, yes, people would pretty much get the same thing no matter what type of work that they do. They would be rewarded with the same material type of wealth, meaning a place to live, food to eat, and preferably nice place to live, not just at a one bedroom 600 square foot apartment that's falling apart or something like that, but a nice home, in a nice community with all the amenities and stuff like that. However, the difference from the positive reinforcement we receive now through the monetary system versus the positive reinforcement we would receive in a moneyless society would be that people give you the positive reinforcement more in the sense of relationships and community building, and you're also getting positive reinforcement in the sense that that you are contributing and helping other people live better lives. And a lot of the time that's actually going to translate into better lives for not just the person you're helping, but let's say you put in a project to help build an automated garden, right, for your entire community. What are some of the benefits that could be? Not only are you providing yourself with food, you're providing the rest of the community with food, which is something that people inherently need. And you think people are going to be appreciative of that? You think they might say thank you for doing that? Oh, that's really cool, and actually give you some sort of appreciation. Maybe you throw a party or something like that as well and celebrate everybody that pitched in on that, and you have a big feast with everybody like that. And I think a lot of people kind of misconstrue what the material wealth provides versus what we're actually getting from that material wealth. A lot of the time, we can have a big house, but if we're working all the time, what good does that really do us? I think what a lot of people really want, instead of having a big house, is simply a place to call home and relax. And they want security and comfort in that home. They want to feel, like they have a place that's their own, that they can, go home and just relax with their family. Instead of having a car, people want transportation really to get from point A to point B, as long as it's comfortable, and doesn't fall apart and actually get you there. Then that's kind of the end goal of a lot of these things. And if you can provide those things, if you can provide community, security, comfort, relationships, developing, actually giving people free time to pursue their own interests, to pursue their own health, their wellness, their relationships, even travel and things like that, because you can have networks of cooperatives where you could travel the world, and stay in various cooperatives, and through network systems like this. You don't have to be stuck in one place. Let's say you have a community garden that you build here, but next time let's go to Portugal, and help install something there, right? And then maybe at the end of that we have a big party in Portugal, and you learned Portuguese partially in the process, and you met 20 new friends in the process of doing so.
That's a
So there's a lot of other possibilities. Go ahead. Sorry.
that's a nice trade-off as well too. You talked about security, like being in the home and everything else, and of course, in Spain where they don't need a police force and all that, how do they handle disputes?
Right, and that's a good question. A lot of the time it's, first of all, when there's not as much money and property involved, you probably have fewer disputes, and especially when people aren't worried, that they're not going to get the necessities to survive. And through cooperation and communication, essentially, and just kind of realizing that, hey, we all are in this together. And if we can work together to provide everybody with what we need, then nobody really has to lose and nobody really has to go without, in all these ways. And that's kind of, it's a shift in mindset from saying, how do I get enough for me to survive, to instead, how can we work together so everyone thrives, in
Hmm.
this environment?
Hmm. And certainly indeed as well too. I talk more with Matt Holten in the book Moneyless Society, the next economic evolution, some things about that, along with his podcast. But first, listen to the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at SonicWebStudios.com for all your needs. Look at a professional website without breaking your budget. Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs at below the competition rate. Call today, 1-800-303-3960. It's 1-800-303-3960, or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 20% off your first project. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, time to give an official shout out to our official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international war-wearing author Mia Molson Zia. If you love fast-paced mysteries, you love Missing by Mia Molson Zia, available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. Missing is fast-paced and intriguing with an unforgettable twist. Takes place in 4 countries, 2 strangers, 1 target, where truth is illusion and those you love will be the first go missing. It's available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. Missing by Mia Molson Zia has garnered great reviews, and Eve 11 enjoys by Howard celebrities, including Joanna Cassie, Forge Riley, and Hills. So grab your copy today for Goes Missing by Mia Molson Zia, available on Amazon. Also, check out the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com and over 40 podcast platforms, heard in 100 countries, including Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Also, Anchor FM, Apple Music, Google Play, along with Radio Public, Geo7, Himalaya, also Pandora, and TuneIn. Also, subscribe on YouTube, BitChute, Rumble, and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and more. Make sure you take us with you on any mobile device. And don't forget to check out the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, and check out the Mike Wagner Show gift store, t-shirts, pop sockets, hoodies, throw pillows, tote bags, makes great gifts 24/7. Go to Amazon.com. Check out the Mike Wagner Show podcast. And for more great gift ideas, go to Amazon.com/Mia Molson Zia for great books like Missing, Once, and Wrinkles. Also t-shirts, pop sockets, hoodies, phone cases, and more. Amazon.com/Mia Molson Zia. Check it out today. I'll support the Mike Wagner Show on Anchor FM, PayPal, and the MikeWagnerShow.com. Make sure you do so today. We're here with author, activist, Matt Holten here on the Mike Wagner Show and Moneyless Society, the next economic evolution. And, just a couple of things about Moneyless Society. And, how'd you first start writing the book, and what was the inspiration behind it? The precise moment simply said, I'm going to write a book about it.
Well, it took me about 5 years before I really heard about the idea to start writing a book. I saw a movie, I think it was in 2012, called Zeitgeist Addendum, which is by a gentleman named Peter Joseph. And in that movie, he dissects the monetary system and really just kind of talks about the flaws of capitalism and the way, the banking and monetary system works and the effects of those systems. But he also presents a solution called the Venus Project. Now, the Venus Project is this project in Florida, Venus, Florida, hence the name, the Venus Project, started by a guy named Jacques Fresco. Jacques Fresco died a couple years ago now. He was a ripe old age, 101. And but he was also a futurist and inventor. And he envisioned a future type of society that he calls a resource-based economy. And it's very similar to what we talk about, like in Moneyless Society. It was kind of the inspiration behind a lot of what I'm doing now, and a lot of the people in the movement are doing. Although we don't really, dogmatically follow the resource-based economic model. What I was hoping was going to happen was, I was really hoping that I would find a community of people, a physical community of people that wanted to start working on building this type of society. through automation and co-ops and whatever, structures they could, conjure up. But lo and behold, there was no community. There was no physical community of people that were doing that. And I was really hoping that there were, because I would have joined it like right away. But as the more I learned about it, the more I learned that other people really wanted that too. They want to start living in communities and in places where these systems and structures are actually being developed and are starting to take root and take hold into where there is a different way of life that's possible. So that was kind of the whole precipice to starting, the website and everything there. But honestly, it was when my son was born in the year 2017
Wow.
that I really, yeah, it was, and I was like, you know what, if I'm going to do one thing to really solidify these ideas, is it's going to be to put them on paper and put them all in one place, to where people can pick up a book and they can find all these ideas in one place. And I had been toying with the idea for a while, but when I had a son, I was just kind of like, if I don't do this, I'm not going to forgive myself for not doing this, essentially, because I want to make the world a better place for both my kids and any other people's kids and future generations, period. So that was kind of the main inspiration for it, was the Venus Project, this movie, the Zeitgeist film, Zeitgeist Addendum, and then just really wanting to actually build a community for these things. But it's difficult to build a community for these things without people being aware that these possibilities even exist. And so that's kind of the stage that we're in right now, is educating people about how these systems could operate, how they could possibly start to form, how we could transition to these types of systems, and then getting enough people together that are actually interested in doing it. Because it's not something that, one person or even a group of, 5 or 10 people are going to be able to do alone. It's going to take larger communities with technicians and cooperation, and larger and larger scale cooperation as these things progress and keep moving and keep developing. But it all starts with a small group of people dedicated to doing just that. And so that's essentially what we're doing right now, is gathering people who are interested in heading that direction, and then making plans to do that, essentially making plans to create cooperatives and create communities and actually start building these ideals and these systems in real life.
Mhm.
And hopefully within a few years, we might be able to get some of these, communities and structures off the ground. We don't really have any super solid plans as of yet, but that's the direction we're heading. And we're definitely amassing, a good number of people who are also interested in doing the same thing. And it's kind of funny, I mean, because the worse the economy gets, the worse climate change gets, the worse our inequality gets, the more people become interested in all this stuff, because
Mhm.
they're the logical solutions to it.
Mhm.
And people are like, why can't we just cooperate? Why can't we just give each other what we need? We
Mhm.
can. We just have to choose to do it.
And speaking of being cooperative, the co-ops and giving what they need, abundance and everything else. What about bartering? Has that been considered?
Bartering is something that, it's a topic that we keep coming back to. And essentially, I mean, bartering is another form of trade. So we don't really want to, implement bartering as a necessary structure. It might be used. And it's kind of funny, because a lot of the most recent research actually shows that really no past societies have been completely founded upon barter. If anything, they were more kind of gifting economies. Like it's not like, well, I have this bag of rice and I'm going to trade it to you for a chicken. It's like, well,
Right. Yeah. If it's a bag of
hey
rice,
neighbor,
I
I
want a
have some
couple of
rice.
chickens. Don't you think? Yeah.
But a lot of the time it's more just kind of like gifting, and then if you need a gift in return later, then your neighbor gives you that gift in return later. And it's more of like an honor system, to where that's how a lot of the past structures and communities were based, where if your neighbor needed some rice, you gave him some rice. And if you needed a chicken in the future, your neighbor gave you a chicken, because you were there and you were neighbors and you cooperated and you helped each other. And it wasn't like, well, if you don't have a chicken, I'm not going to give you this rice, blah, blah, blah. It's like, you're my neighbor. I know you need this. And I know I'm going to help you with this. And I know you're going to help me in the future, because we're here and we're in this together. And neither one of us can do all this alone.
Mhm.
And, and it's kind of the realization that, none of us really can do this alone, that none of us are an island, and
Right.
that's what makes modern society so frustrating, so difficult to so many people in so many ways, is trying to do everything by themselves, trying to be this isolated little island and function in all these different ways and have all these different capacities and fulfill all these different roles within your tiny little box in society. People get stressed out going a million different directions, trying to do a million different things, when in reality, it takes a community of people to do practically anything. Go ahead and try to build your own iPhone, your own computer, or even go ahead and try to grow your own rice, something like that. Could you imagine making everything in your home, or could you even imagine everybody in your block making everything on your home? No, probably take thousands of people to make everything in your home, and businesses and structures and different things. But we have to realize that the more we cooperate and the more we localize these systems, the more we can produce things locally, the more we can use sustainable materials, the more we can cooperate to do so. There's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle, and when we throw them all in there, we can really come up with some really cool, really creative, really innovative things that help people really thrive, without having to trade our time and labor or even barter anything, and that's the ultimate goal.
Right. And in a case of, like, if you need a steak, you can give me some Padres tickets or something. How's that? So
right, exactly. And I mean, and we don't really necessarily want to create a society that's exclusive either. Like, oh, well, you gave me this steak, so now you get this in return. It's like, no, everybody, if you want that, you get access to it, period. You know what I mean? If you want a good education, you get access to a good education. If you want to see a sports game, you get access to the sports game. Maybe there's a stadium, and yeah, there's so much capacity in that stadium, you might have to wait till the next game or something like that, or put your name on a list or some sort of system like that. But we don't necessarily want it to be like a contribution based thing either, to where people are directly rewarded for their contributions. Although, that will happen to a degree, just from general positive reinforcement also, you know what I mean? But we want to eliminate the transaction dynamics as much as possible there, because those transaction dynamics, incentivize, it's basically another form of profit. It incentivizes inequality, it incentivizes exploitation, it incentivizes extra resource use and things like that. We want to do as much as we can with as little as possible. And that's kind of the goal, this controlled degrowth, kind of economic contraction, to where we actually do more with less, and everybody gets what they need by utilizing fewer resources, less labor.
And that's also a really good point as well, too. And you also co-host the Moso podcast on a weekly basis. You go more into the book, you go more into Moneyless Society, and as well, too. And how do we get access to the podcast? We'll find out just one minute with author activist Matt Holten of Moneyless Society. You listen to the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios, and brought to you by official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international war-ring author Mia Molson's The Missing. We'll be back with author activist Matt Holten of Moneyless Society after this time. We're back with author activist Matthew Holten here on the Mike Wagner Show with Moneyless Society, the next economic evolution. And we cover a lot of ground about Moneyless Society. Of course, you can put that in the bank, or if you don't want to, that's fine as well. And you also co-host of the Moso podcast on a weekly basis. And tell us more about that and what inspired you to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we call it MOSO, sometimes we just call it Moneyless Society. I think technically it's the Moneyless Society podcast, so the same name. But that was we started that a couple of years ago. We're in the second season of it now, and it's generally just kind of the idea that we have as an organization to explore this topic, and to really talk to the pioneers in this field, the people who have these ideas, who are building these systems and structures, who are doing the work to move in this direction, and as an organization, as Moneyless Society, we're a nonprofit as well. And we're constantly reaching out to people. We're constantly learning more. And we like to be open-minded as an organization. There's a few other kind of similar organizations out there that are kind of doing the same thing, but we like to kind of view ourselves as one of the organizations that really just kind of explores all the different topics that are out there regarding this, and comes at it with more of an open mind, than most probably do. And And we don't like to ridicule, ideas or say, oh, it's not going to work for this and this reason. Like, oh, that's an interesting idea. We'd like to hear more about that. Tell us
Mm.
more. Maybe it could work in this situation or this, or, and just kind of have an open discussion about these topics. And, if people have ideas or projects or things they're working on, we like to hear about it, and we like to talk about those things, and we like to, explore how these ideas might evolve and progress in the long term, and just have good conversations about all that stuff. So that's really what the podcast is about now
Mhm.
in its second season.
Mhm. And how can we help when it comes to Moneyless Society? How can we help and get involved?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So, one is just, obviously read the book, learn more about it. That's why I wrote the book, is to really just kind of put all that information in one place, because it is a vast topic with so many different moving parts and so many different aspects of it. You got sustainability, you got, regenerative farming, you've got automation, technology, you've got new governance systems, you've got, psychology and positive reinforcement and health and wellness, and how all these things would interplay with each other. I mean, so it's really a really broad subject, because the monetary system and our economic system affects so many aspects of our lives, and the new system would affect all those aspects as well. So we have to talk about them and address them, and try to do that in the most comprehensive way possible. So that's kind of where the book has like all the information that really just kind of tries to break it down and distill it into an easily digestible manner. So I highly recommend reading the book, getting familiar with the subject, and then talking about these things. There's this thing called the Overton window, or the window of acceptable discourse. In a moneyless society, is not really within the window of acceptable to discourse. It's not something people talk about on a regular basis or even accept as a possibility. And that's kind of something we're trying to change with our podcast, with the work that we do, with the outreach and with the education that we do, is talking to people about this subject, educating them about this subject, and just really getting it out into the public and the public conversation. Like, oh yeah, I didn't even think that that could work like that, or that these structures could exist, or that we might be able to transition in such and such way. And most of the time, 95% of the people that I talk to, most of the stuff has never even occurred to them, that the society could operate like this, that we could have these sorts of systems and structures if we really, dedicated our, time and effort into creating them.
Hmm.
So that's another great way, just to talk to other people about it. And if you really want to make some progress, start building these systems and structures in your own home, in your own community, with your neighbors and with your friends and family. If you can build an automated garden in your community that feeds, an entire block or an entire community or something like that, then you just created a moneyless system for food. Essentially, if you can do that with a cooperative or something like that, with your community. And there will be systems popping up like that in the future. The more people talk about it, the more they start, essentially producing what they need within their own structures, so that they're capable of doing that.
Hmm.
And it'll start small and it'll grow. Like, people will be able to produce their own food through automated systems probably before they'll be able to produce their own electricity, a lot of the time through automated systems, because manufacturing solar panels is probably going to be a little bit more difficult than, growing tomatoes.
Hmm.
So, but in any case, the point is to try to localize as much of that as possible, to automate as much of it as possible, to start producing those things ourselves within our own communities and regions and things like that as much as possible, for ourselves within these cooperative systems, and experiment with it, see how it evolves, and if you have feedback of something that works, let us know. We want to hear about it. We want to hear what people are doing and what progress they're making,
Hmm.
and if there is, a cooperative that does start an automated garden, somebody, we want to be all over it. We want to hear all about it and how it's working, things like
Mm.
that,
That,
and
that sounds really
so.
interesting too. And where can we find the book? Where can we find the podcast and get more information?
Sure, great. Yeah. The book is on most of the major platforms, as well as the podcast. Moneyless Society, The Next Economic Evolution is the name of the book. You can just Google it. You'll find it on Barnes and Noble, Amazon, as well as most of the other major sales platforms. Same thing with the podcast. We're on YouTube. We're on Podbean, which distributes to a lot of different platforms like Apple and most of the major ones. So it shouldn't be very difficult to just Google the name Moneyless Society and find both the podcast and the book in numerous forms there.
All right. Well,
But if
sir.
you want to check out our website too, sorry, I was going to say the website, moneylesssociety.com. You can find it all there. And we also have a link tree. If you Google Moneyless Society link tree, you'll come back with a link tree with all our links. There's like 20 different links to all our social media platforms and websites and everything else. So,
and checking out the website is free, by the way. So,
yes, definitely. No paywall there.
that's right. We're here with author activist Matthew Holten of Moneyless Society, the next economic evolution, here on the Mike Wagner Show. And Matt, just a few more minutes here. We'd love to have you back and checking the progress. What else can we expect from you in 2023 and beyond, Matt?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, at this point, we're really kind of just solidifying our organizational structure, especially because we're starting to grow at a steady clip now, and so that's kind of one of the hurdles we're overcoming now is really getting a solid organizational structure down. We're probably going to be utilizing sociocracy, which is this kind of newer social governance structure that has much less hierarchy. It's much more democratically run, not one leader person at the top just dictating everything, which is really how we advocate more autonomy within these systems. So our organization is kind of going through some changes and growing pains and things like that, which is kind of getting these structures in place. But once they are in place, I expect that we're going to start growing pretty rapidly, especially once we have a lot of this figured out. And we're going to continue with our podcast and our outreach. But hopefully, within the next couple of years, we'll probably start putting together some of these cooperative structures and maybe even a community or something within the next few years. So that's our ultimate goal, is to really kind of start creating communities and co-ops in real life. I don't think that's probably going to happen in 2023, but maybe within the next few years here. So,
and we're certainly looking forward as well, too, Matt. And who do you consider biggest influence in your career?
At this point, I would probably say it's probably a toss-up between Jacques Fresco and Peter Joseph. They're the ones who kind of really turned me on to the subject. Peter Joseph is the person who created the Zeitgeist films, the Zeitgeist Addendum, and Jacques Fresco is the guy who created the Venus Project, which is the one that he advocates in those films. They're both incredibly brilliant thinkers, far ahead of their time in the ideas and their philosophies and the things that they say. And if I could be ever be on that level, then I would be I don't even know the term I would use, but it would be a great feeling to be considered within that sort of company in my life. But
that's certainly amazing as well. I like that. And what's the best advice you can give to anybody at this point?
I would just say learn more and be open-minded about this subject. Don't shoot it down, because there's a lot of nuance and a lot of detail out there and a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of experimentation that needs to happen in order for this to be figured out. And if you come at it with an open mind, and if you're willing to look at all the projects and all the information that's out there, you'll probably be pretty surprised at what you see and what you find, because there's a lot going on in this realm that's not really being talked about, in the mainstream, media and publications or everything. But that there's certainly a growing following of people out there with this mindset and with these, goals in mind for the long term. So I'd say just come at it with an open mind and educate yourself on it is the first step, for sure.
We certainly do so as well, too. This is a really good subject. We're here with author activist of Moneyless Society, the next economic evolution, Matt Holten, here on the Mike Wagner Show. Matt, a very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely fantastic. Learned a lot from you. Looking forward to having you again soon. Keep us up to date. Keep in touch. Love to have you back. Once again, what's your website? How do people contact you? Where can people purchase? Check out your books and check out your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, you can find the book on most of the major platforms, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or just Google it. It'll come back all types of different ways. Moneylesssociety.com is the website. There is a book website also, which is moneylesssociety.book.com. And our link tree, just Moneyless Society link tree, Google that. It'll take you to all our social media platforms. Facebook, actually, we have a large following on Facebook, a conversation too with 24,000 people in our Facebook group. So if you want to come and partake in that conversation, you'll probably learn a lot of interesting stuff. And we've got a Facebook page with about 250,000 followers too. So just lots of interesting conversations happening within that realm too. So highly recommend checking that out.
We'll certainly do so as well. Once again, Matt, a very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely fantastic. Learned a lot. Looking forward to having you again soon. Keep us up to date. Keep in touch. Love to have you back. Wish you all the best. And Matt, you definitely have a great future ahead of you.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. My pleasure.